Good afternoon and welcome to today's PFP AML compliance webinar. Today's webinar should last no longer than about an hour, and we'd be delighted to receive questions from you, which we'll try and answer during the webinar. We do have a few hundred people listening today, so if we don't have time to answer all your questions during the webinar, we will endeavour to get back to you in due course. I'm very pleased to introduce you to Mike Sturgis, the Chairman of SWAT UK. Good afternoon, Mike.
Good afternoon.
Mike will be presenting the webinar today, and Mike will also be joined by Ian Burgess, the Managing Director of DHIS. And both Mike and Ian were instrumental in the development of PFP AML compliance, and we're delighted that they're able to join us today. So without further ado, I'll pass you over to Mike.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. What I'm going to cover today is to take you through the software that we've developed, which is PFP AML compliance. But before we do that, what I'm going to do is just take you through the background to this. As you may well know, SWAT UK deals with probably about 2,000 firms of accountants each year, and we visit lots and lots of firms. And part of that, we do compliance checks. And when we're out looking at what's happening out there with firms, we start to look at the different aspects of money laundering compliance, and many of them are hitting some problems. So as an example, if you imagine we were coming into your firm and I pulled out, say, 50 or 100 files at random, we don't normally do that many, but let's just imagine we've got that number, would I find a risk assessment on all of those 50 or 100 clients? If I looked on those files, would I find that you've got adequate customer due diligence on the entity? Does the actual entity, the company or the charity or whatever exist? And would I have a list of all the key players, the directors, the trustees or whoever? And have you done customer due diligence on some of the key players? Would I have evidence of identification, or would I have details of all the beneficial owners, and then on a risk basis ID? Your staff have to report knowledge or suspicion of money laundering. Would I find know your client information on each file so that they would have an understanding of what to expect on a particular client, so they would know, is this a normal transaction or is this suspicious in relation to this particular client? If I looked through your personnel files, would I find initial training on the money laundering regulations, the Prosecuted Crime Act and the Terrorism Act for all of your staff? But the regulations require more than an initial training. They also require ongoing training, since your staff have to report knowledge or suspicion of money laundering or terrorist financing. You have to provide ongoing training so that they would recognize suspicious transactions and give them training on how to deal with that. You have to have, as a firm, policies and procedures, and those policies and procedures need to be tailored to the particular risk profile of your practice. If I asked your staff what your firm's policies and procedures, A, would they know if you've got them, B, would they know where they are, and C, would they know what they say? You're not supposed to be, well, you're not allowed to be dealing with people who are on the HM Treasury sanctions list. So is it possible that you haven't done sanctions checks and you may actually have a client who's on the sanctions list, and you need particular rules to apply to politically exposed persons? Now, most firms I talk to say, no, that's just not going to happen to us. But we deal with a lot of firms, and we have got clients with PEPs, and we've even was doing a review on one, and we suggested they ran a sanctions check on some of their clients, and they ran it on their largest client, only to find that the person in charge of that client, who'd never visited this country, had an international arrest warrant. It does happen. Not very often, but it's there. One of the other requirements of the regulations is you have to keep everything up to date. And finally, you've got to record everything. And for those who have been following cases, there's a case called Shah versus HSBC, where Mr. Shah was unhappy about what had happened in 2007, where he'd been reported, he'd lost a lot of money, he was suing HSBC. This went to court and was in 2011, 2012 was finally settled. So 5 years after the event, HSBC were having to justify the decisions they took 5 years ago. Now, could you do all of that for all of your clients? And most of the firms we visit, the honest answer is no. They wouldn't tick all of those questions. So the next question you ask the MLRO is, okay, which clients don't comply? And the answer I would normally get is, I haven't a clue. The only way of finding out is to open up every file and see whether or not they do comply. So we designed this software that you're now seeing or about to come up on the screen to answer every one of those questions, so that you can go through all of the questions we've dealt with there, and more is incorporated into this software. Now, perhaps the most good thing about the software is actually it's highly intuitive and highly visual. So, for example, here we can see on the left-hand side of the list of clients, there's a load of ticks and a load of crosses. And a green tick means the client is compliant, and a red cross means there's a problem. Now, we will get into this, and I'll drill down into this a little bit more and show you how this software works. But let's assume for a moment you're starting, and over on the left side here, we've got something called the MLRO administrative functions. And if I click on that, now that's just coming up on your screen now, you will see we've got a whole range of functions. I'll look at some of these later on, but what I'm doing now is typing in a master password so that I can get into the setup procedures. And sat behind here, we have something called global preferences. So when you set up this system, you can decide how you want it to work. So, for example, one of the questions I asked was, would you know if all your information was up to date? Every time you put a piece of information into the software, it says, when's it going to run out? When does it need to be updated? And there are defaults built into the software that you can use, or you can change them. So, for example, you might want to say, I'm going to review every client every year because most of my clients are on an annual cycle anyway. So I'm just going to default everything to 12 months. Or I'm going to have a system where I'm going to review it every 3 years if it's a low-risk client, 2 years if it's normal, 1 year if it's a high-risk client. But you then get to the point of, well, what happens if I approach that date? Because one of the things that the software will do is it will turn from a green tick, the client is compliant, to an amber light bulb saying it's heading towards a review date. So at what point do you want it to change? Now, what we've set up here is I want it to sort of flag up 90 days. So 90 days before a review runs out, it changes from green to amber. But you may say, well, I'm going to have too many. I'm going to have 25% of my clients, if I'm doing an annual review, that are not compliant. So you can change that to any time you want, 30 days or 10 days or whatever. The other thing that we've got in here is, if we're looking at the compliance process, it's just clicked through onto your screen now, you have the ability to put whatever level of checking you want into the software. So you can have full checking, which is what I've got on this demonstration. We actually use this software in SWAT UK, and we have disabled Know Your Client or Know Your Customer Information, because we've got a dedicated database that runs the business, and we have got huge amounts of data on our clients in the database. There's very little point from our point of view saying, well, I'm going to replicate this by having a few simple pieces of information on a piece of software that's not dynamically linked to that database. Therefore, we just disable it. But you've got the ability to put it in full checking. I'll keep it, and I can enter information, but I don't want it to report if there's a problem, or you disable it altogether. So you are in control of this software. It doesn't control you. You have the ability to decide what to do. As well as having expert guidance, so if you can see on the screen, just down in the bottom right-hand corner, there's a little button called Expert Guidance. What we've put in here is effectively our manual on money laundering, which has got all of the different information about how the rules apply. So from this point of view, what we're looking at is a system where we have actually built in the procedures. If you are looking at some of the other things, quite often you need access to information such as the money laundering regulations, the joint money laundering steering group guidance and things like that. So we have the ability within this to actually drop down and do a search on these. So for example, if I click down at the bottom in search guides and look at the joint money laundering, and I'm searching for something like tipping off and carry out the search, it will actually open up the various guidance, do a search, and help click through to the various bits and pieces that you've got. So we've now jumped into the tipping off section. So certainly from that point of view, if you've got any questions about, well, what exactly am I supposed to do here in terms of this particular process? How do I, what does that mean? How do I apply that in practice? We have actually built into this software all of the information that you need. I have actually seen a couple of questions coming up saying, are we just demonstrating software today, or are we going to go through and give you a money laundering update? The purpose of today is actually to take you through the software and show you how you can actually deal with some of the issues that, as the MLRO, you're having to face. One of the other questions I've seen is when you're setting up, can we import facilities? And you can see down there is a bit when I go into the AML compliance functions. If I open that up back up again, there is the ability to import CSV files. So you can bring in files of your clients. So the first thing is you'll bring in the entities. So you have entities and you will have people who will be the directors in your companies, the trustees in your charities, and so on. Then from that point of view, you've got the ability to bring them in, not only bring in the people, but you can link the people to the entity as well. So you can say, well, this person is linked to that company, and it will actually set those up. So there's not dynamic links, except, well, there is a dynamic link with BHIS's company secretarial software PC share register. So there is a dynamic link with that, but you've always got the ability to bring in new clients, CSV file them in, and they come into the system. If we have a look at one of the clients on here, we can actually see the red ticks and the green ticks and the red crosses. You can run a compliance summary which just shows you a pie chart and gives you a hint as to how many clients you've got, what percentage of them have got problems. And we can also run a filter on it and just say, give me the red clients. What I'm going to do now is take SWAT UK, which is a client that we've got set up in here, and actually drill down into that company and have a look. At the moment it's sat on the other screen, so let me just drag him over for you. And we can see where the problems are. So we have 4 areas on this screen as I take to full size. So when it comes through on your screen now, on the top right-hand side, you'll be able to see there's 2 red crosses and 2 green ticks in the top part of the system. So we have a problem with associated persons, we have a problem with know your client. If I click on the red cross or the associated persons, it will drill down, and we can see we've entered in here all of the clients, or all of the directors and beneficial owners. An interesting point up here, although we've put them all in, we do have the ability with one, and we've got a grayed out one here, because as we've clicked into Vicky Manthorpe, there's a little button here when it comes through where I can click to say, I don't actually need ID. So I'm going to use this system if I want to record all of the directors, but I don't need to get ID, at least not for this particular client. Alternatively, all I would do is record the ones that I want to get evidence of ID on. So we can see I've got identification on 2, on Richard Brown and Adrian Gibbons, but Mike Sturgis has got a bit of an issue. So if I double click on Mike Sturgis to find out what the problem is, then we have a front screen coming up which has got my basic information, tells me the relationship with the entity. So here I'm down as a director. If I go through to click on this particular client, so go through to my records, what you have is a number of ways in which you can meet the requirements of the regulations. Sat behind this piece of software is a huge database with literally hundreds of different options depending on what type of entity it is. So if it's a charity, there are certain things you would need to do. If it's a limited company or a listed company or an IFA or a firm of solicitors, there's different requirements for the different types of entities. And so sat behind this is this huge database. And what we have here, you've got either electronic evidence of ID, then an OR, and the OR is government issued photo ID with a sanctions check, or non-photo ID. So it's going through the options. And what we need to do is get in one of those bands of options green ticks to them all. So we've built into this software the ability to do electronic verification, electronic identification. So I've clicked on it and it says, do you want to do electronic identification? Do you want to add a record? And I'm saying, yes, I'm going to do that. And so it opens up a record and says, okay, do you wish now to do the ID check? So I'll say, yes, I'm going to do an ID check. And it tells you what you need to do. Now, the way this software works is that you only pay for what you do. So that the software comes based on the number of clients, etc. You don't need to use electronic verification, but you can set up an account with the GB group, and you pay monthly in arrears only for those ID checks you do. Now, there are a lot of ID checks people out there, people who are providing this facility. Most of them, you've got to commit to a minimum spend. You could literally set up with this, and if you only did 3 in a year, over the year you'd pay £9, because they're £3 for a basic search. If you wanted to get into more detail, it costs you another 50p. So I'm going to perform the check, and it does actually require me, when the next bit comes up on your screen down in the bottom right, to confirm that I'm going to do it. So I've ticked to say I'm happy to do that, and it is actually now performing the check. So live as we're doing this, it's I can see the little bit going around saying I'm performing the check. It's done the check. It's downloading the report for me, and I can review the report. And on the second page here, on the first page I got a green tick. But on the second page, you can see as I bring this up larger, what this is telling me now is it's gone off and done verification. It has checked my name and my date of birth, my address against the electoral roll. So it's happy that the Mr., the Michael James, and the Sturgis at my address are all there. It's checked against the shared database. And from that point of view, this is the database held by all the banks, by all the credit cards, and for all of that. So if you've got a credit card, if you've got a loan, if you've got a mortgage, your name will be there. This is not carrying out a credit check. What it's actually doing is seeing that you exist. It's a very different footprint from the electronic footprint that you would get if you did a credit check. And to be honest, if loads of people suddenly went to do a credit check on me, my credit rating would go down. This does not affect people's credit rating at all. It's just checking you exist. So I've got lots of ticks on there. It's also checked that I'm not dead. I always find it reassuring. Every now and again I run a check on myself just to make sure I'm still alive. But one of the ways in which you can actually clone somebody is to go back and get a birth certificate from somebody who's died and then start to build up an ID based on that. So it cross-checks my information against the register to show I'm not deceased. Now, unfortunately, I'm too old to fit into the next bit, which is the birth index, because they only actually recorded information for between 1984 and 2003. So anybody born in that period, it would check against there. It also checks I haven't moved, and from that point of view, that there's not a redirect from from the post office, and it checks with British Telecom there is a telephone at that address, and that the number of that telephone matched with my surname and my initials for that address. It checked that there was an electricity supply at the house. I could put in the supply number, and it would actually check that that is my house that bill's for. One of the things I could do, if I wanted to try and spoof this, I could take somebody's passport, I could take somebody's electricity bill, stick them into Photoshop, and just play around with them, and then produce the information. I could actually print out an electricity bill that would look reasonably good, but it's actually your bill with my name on. This could, if you put that supply number in, check that that supply number does not relate to my address. There are very few ways of doing the sanctions checks and PEP checks other than doing them electronically. You can actually download the sanctions list from the Treasury and run a manual check, and again the software allows you to do that, but it doesn't get you a PEP check. And what this particular check does is not only look at HM Treasuries, it does worldwide sanctions checks.
Hi, Mike. We have had a question from one of our listeners.
Yeah, I did see it, and I was going to pick that one up. So the question coming in there is, do you take all the ID for all directors and trustees? The answer is no, you don't. You use a risk-based approach. So let me close this down. You'll notice now that having done that check and got the green tick, it's automatically stored that PDF on Mike Sturgis's details. So I can go back and see that at any time, and it's automatically filled out the bit saying verified and ticked the evidence satisfactory. I'm still going to come to that question in a moment. If I click OK to save it, it will say, hang on a minute, you haven't set a review date. When are you going to look at this to make sure it's up to date? It won't allow you to save anything, and it defaults to our standard one of 24 months that we set up at the beginning. So I've now dealt with that, and I've now got a tick against this. Now, if I'm looking at the question which said, well, who do I do? If I click on expert guidance, what this guidance has now done is it's said, well, I'm in the bit about client ID and associated persons, so what guidance have I got there? So how do I decide which individuals need evidence? I can open it up, and there's guidance there on what you need to do. So from that point of view, we've built in the guidance, and it's quite intuitive as to where you are within the software. The answer to the question is no, you wouldn't normally do this. To be honest, if it's a normal risk with the 4 directors there, I would probably pick 1 or 2 and just test them. But it does depend on your risk, and there is guidance here to answer that question.
Mike, another question we've had is, another listener's asked, is it compulsory for money laundering purposes to do background checks as extensively as this?
What you need to do, and the evidence that we have in the system that we've built in here is based on the Joint Money Laundering Steering Group guidance. For accountants, we have the CCAB guidance, but that points to the Joint Money Laundering Steering Group guidance. If I click back into this, you should be doing one of these sections. So either do an electronic verification, or here I would get a copy of a passport, and it's so easy through this software to run a sanctions check that we just say run a sanctions check. It literally takes seconds. Even if you did a manual one where it would go off, it would take the name, it would download the sanctions check from HM Treasury, it would pop that into a search, and it would come up with a list, does Mike Sturgis appear on the sanctions list? And so it literally, you can do it in a few seconds. You do need to cover these different things. This is one of the problems, what we're finding there. People are saying, well, I've got lots of evidence on the file already. Well, you've got maybe, the evidence from HMRC, you've got the tax information. But that's government issue, but it's not photo ID. So that would be government non-photo ID. So this would be the top one, which case I'd also need a separate piece of ID, which is a proof of home address, or sanctions check, and the sanctions check, because you really ought to be doing that. So you have to do one of these. You could just rely on third party, but you've got to get one block done. And if you're not doing that at the moment, you're probably not you are not complying with the regulations, because the Joint Money Laundering Steering Group guidance is quite explicit about what you need to do. So we've taken that and we've built it into the software. If you've not got a green tick, then you're not complying. So if we go back to me as a person, then I've now got a green tick. If we then drop back into the company, you can see the associated persons. They've now all got green ticks. And so when I go back to the General tab, the associated person has now got a tick. But I've still got a problem with know your client. We've built a very simple know your client basis in here where you've got a number of questions and you can then input the answers into the space. And this is just free text where you can put an answer in. So there's only the one question I've left undone. So if I put in well, I can put anything I like in here. But I also have to have a box which says, is this answer satisfactory? Because we literally didn't want people just running their fingers over the keyboard and putting drivel in there. If I try and say OK, it will force me to say, is it satisfactory? I'll say, yep, I'm happy with that. So I've now answered that question. SWAT UK goes green. Now, Mike Sturgis was involved in a number of entities, and so wherever my ID for Mike Sturgis is used, it looks to the underlying records and says, well, that's okay. However, I am in West Holdings Limited. And in West Holdings Limited, when we click down, you'll see Mike Sturgis is there as the associated person, but I've got a red cross against me. It's just coming up on your screen now. And you think, well, why is that? If I click into my records and look at what I need for me, it will come up on your screen in a moment, and it says, well, you need electronic verification, but you need an extra piece of supporting documentation. Because what we've got here is a system which looks at the risk. And again, all the guidance says, for high-risk clients, you need to have more extensive customer due diligence. So in order to get this, I would need to drop in, say, well, I want a piece of extra ID, and that could be something like, it'll be an electricity bill. So I would type in there. I can attach that bill and say I can either scan it in or I can go and find one that I've already scanned before, and I'll just pick up something from here. I'll just pick one up and attach the file and say I'm happy with that evidence. So I've now got attached to this record an item which will be the evidence I want. I set the expiry date for 2 years, well, or even I do it for 1 year because actually this is now a high-risk client, so I say I'm going to keep an eye on this. I've now met the evidence that I need, and when I back out of that one and look at the client, well, that client's ticked as well. Another question's come up, do you need the photo ID if we do the £3 search? No, you don't. I mean, this is the easiest way of dealing with clients that you've had for a long time. It's some of the firms, to be honest, I don't agree with them, but lots of firms say it's embarrassing going to a client that I've known for 20 years, asking if they can prove who they are and can I have a copy of their passports. The electronic verification for normal client, for normal risks, is all you need. You don't then need to do passports. Now, you may want to say, well, for reference, if you want to send me a photocopy of your passport, that's belt and braces, but you don't need that. What a lot of other people do is they say, I need a passport and a utility bill for all clients, which is not true. Joint Money Laundering Steering Group says, for normal risk clients, you just need photo ID. So that could be a photo driving license or a passport. His firearms certificate, I mean, if he brings that in with the firearms, that's even better. You just say yes, sir, and take it quickly. National identity card if there's somebody abroad. Any of those are enough in their own, unless it's high risk, where the software now says, well, what about, we need another piece of evidence because this is a high-risk client. So far, all I've done is show you what's in the system. And you'll notice now, as we get back to the overview, which is just about to come up on your screen, there it is, we've got an awful lot more ticks because there was just a few people there that needed some issues. How do I set up a new company or a new client? So yes, we can import clients if you've got them from an existing folder, or if it's just on a one-off basis, you can set up a new client. So I've clicked on the new button, and up comes the first screen which says, what type of business are you dealing with? So is this an individual, is it a partnership, listed or unlisted company, LLP, charity, church, club or society, pensions? And if you went through the Joint Money Laundering Steering Group guidance, you'll see there's rules as to what they would expect is the standard evidence of ID for all these types of entities, and we've built all of that into the software. So I'm going to set up an unlisted company, and from that then it's going to say, well, if it's a limited company, do you want to import this from Companies House? So the answer could well be yes, I'm going to want to do that, and if I wanted, I would then just type in the number. So I'm going to put in I'll say yes from that. I'm going to put in the number for our holding company, SWAT Holdings, and I can then type in that number. And this is now connecting to Companies House, and it said, okay, this is SWAT Holdings, active, please review the information. So I have to save the record, but it's gone to Companies House, and it's just dragged in this information. So that's fine, that's there. But it won't actually let me do anything at this stage because I haven't filled in a risk profile. If I try to save it, it'll say you haven't done a risk profile. Do you want to do that? So right down the bottom, we can see there's a little cross down, there's a little cross on the bottom, and I have to define risk. Now I can do it manually if I want, in which case there are the 3 levels of risk we've got. We've got high risk, low risk, and normal risk. If I do it manually and it defaults to normal risk, which will apply for probably 95% of the clients that you've got, then that's fine. If I say low or high risk, I have to add some comment. But what I'm going to do is run a little wizard. So this is looking at it and saying, what type of business is this? Well, it's an entity, it's a business. Is it going to be one of these, listed, FSA, public authority, pension scheme? No. If the answer was yes, it would have been low risk. Does it have a necessary, complex, or unusual business structure? No, it doesn't. If I said yes, it would say it's high risk. Is it owned or operated by or on behalf of a politically exposed person? No, so it's not high risk. Does it interact, or does the entity transact with businesses in countries with weak money laundering regimes? No, it doesn't, so that means it's not high risk. Is there any other reason why it would be high risk? No. Have you met the individuals? Yes, I have. If I hadn't, it would be high risk. Is it a professional body? Accountants, solicitors? I'll say no. If it were, it would be low risk. The result comes out as normal. So it's now done a normal, and if I were to go behind there, you'll see it's starting to give me some extra information. If I click on the notes here, which is just coming through on your screen now, it tracks that the risk assessment was done. If I were to double click on that, it actually gives me this automatically created, prepared by Mike Sturgis on this date, and these are the answers to the questions on the wizard. So you're starting to get a trail of who was doing what there. So we now have a company which I've set up. On the details I've got there, I haven't got a review date, so I'll put down the bottom right hand corner, I'll do a review date. So I'm going to review this in 2 years' time. So I've got my first tick, and then I would go through and see who's going to be applied as an associated person. And I can go in and select a new associated person from the list of people that's there, or create one who's entirely new. So I'm going to, if I just type in STU, I'll put in Mike Sturgis. I'll add me as a new person there. So I'm bringing me in, and when's my review date? It starts to bring it all and say, well, what's my relationship with this company? So I'll say, well, I'm the, I'm a director from whatever date to whatever date. I need to do the ID. I'll update it in a couple of, I'll review it in a couple of years' time, and say OK. Now you'll notice actually, because I've already done all the checks, that this will come through as being all fine for it. Let's complete the fields as before. So, sorry, I cancelled that. I added a new one in there. So, by putting a person in, I clicked the wrong button there, so apologies for that, and I went to add a new person instead of me. Once I've put me in there, it will go and look at the evidence of ID that I've already got there, and it will say, yeah, that's fine. You've got sufficient for Mike based on the risk assessment. We are all done. So that's how you deal with most of the client side of it. But there's a lot more in here than just the client side. I'm the MLRO at SWAT UK because we're also a regulated organisation. So there's a lot of these functions that I have to deal with as well. So we can go into the MLRO administrative functions, and on the left-hand side, there's above the green sort of panel here, there's a whole range of things that I can do. So I can update my firm's IDs, I can create that ID account that you're looking at. I can also do a compliance review. So once a year I can create a compliance review. There's one built into the system, or you can change it, and you can go through and run tests, record your compliance reviews. There's a section here on suspicions. So we can see this will control suspicion. So if one of your staff logs on and wants to create a suspicion for a client, they'll select a client, they'll say add a suspicion, and they'll create the suspicion, which we've now got coming in here. So the suspicion will come through, what's the description of it. So we have the client, we have an individual within that client if appropriate, so that will be the main suspect and an associated suspect, and there's just open information about what to deal with it. So we've got a tax evasion and rather silly comment that I've stuffed in there that's for Angel Wealth Management, suppression of VAT on all halos. But you can just put free text to go in there. What this does do, though, is it creates the action points. So this was acknowledged by the MLRO. This is dummy data, so this would never happen in real life, but this was acknowledged on the 21st of February this year, but nothing's happened with it. So it's sitting as an unresolved one. Now I can actually put in here the date resolved, so if I wanted to put that in for today's date, and if I wanted to, I say, and I report this to the authorities, and I've got free text to put in here why I did or did not report it. So the status is, this is going to be do not report or reported. So I'll put today's date in for reported, and if I wanted to report it, I click on the report to SOCA, and that will actually take me through to the SOCA website. Now I can't, it doesn't log me in automatically, but once I've got to the SOCA website, I would actually then log in and deal with that report. So I'll close the current tab. Now I really should, based on this case that I was talking about, the SHA versus HSBC, I ought to be putting some comments in here. What I can do, of course, is when I report to SOCA, I will get an acknowledgement back from SOCA, and I could actually copy and paste that into there as well and add some comments to it. And I do have expert guidance as normal, and if I were to open on this, the only thing it's saying is, well, you're in the reporting, so the guidance is on reporting knowledge and suspicion, and it gives you guidance on the definition of suspicion, what is knowledge and what is suspicion. I'm going to close that one down. Now you'll notice when you get back to this, I've lost it because I've reported. It's no longer in the list. But I do have a little button down here which says include resolves items. So when I click on that button, I bring all the suspicions I've dealt with. Now in terms of security, I'm logged on as the MLRO. I can see everybody's suspicions, but if you are a member of staff, you can only view your own suspicions. Nobody else can do that. And you can, once I as MLRO have opened up and started work on a suspicion, you can't change your suspicion. You can't change the document. If there's additional information, you can create a new suspicion. There's a couple of questions that have come off. How much is the software? It is all on the website, and you'll get details of the website. But it's based on the number of clients, and if you're using the training aspect I haven't talked about, it's based on the number of people. But it starts from £140. There is a light version if you only wanted to do the electronic checks. There is a light version of the software which costs £49 a year, and that gives you access to unlimited persons, and you can do as many checks as you like at the £3 a click. But it is in fact the same software with lots of things disabled. So if you then said, well, actually I want to upgrade, you don't lose any data. Or if you buy the full version, you feel actually, I'm not really using the full version, I'm only really using the electronic verification, you can downgrade, and you don't lose anything, it's all there. Another question's come up, can you buy the risk assessment module separately? No, I'm sorry, you can't. I can see that you're using Digita there. No, you can't do that one, I'm afraid. But the logic is consistent with what's in all the guidance stuff anyway. So what we're doing is we're saying all clients are normal unless there is a specific reason why they are either high risk or low risk. And we're just going through what are the reasons, such as politically exposed, I haven't met the individuals, dealing with weak money laundering regimes, and so on. So we're looking at the MLRO functions that's within there. So we've gone through, we've looked at the compliance reviews and suspicions. You can up personnel. Now, if you're not involved in, you're not using the training, there's no limit to the number of employees that you can set up, and you can assign these. You can create the name. So I've put principal here, but you can say, well, no, that's a partner. There is a little checkbox in there to say, well, this has the functions of a principal because that's got special features within it, so you can assign clients to principals. But I could create any number of positions within the organization. I've just got principal, manager, and staff, but you could have all the different grades that you want, and you've got different access levels. And when I'm setting up people, if I were to click into my record, you can see within that I've got login details, so you can give people passwords, and I can set up the training. I can look at the training records for me as an individual. Now, when we're looking at training, if you have your own in-house training, so periodically I go into a number of firms and do an annual money laundering update session for them, so there's however many people sat in a room, we're running through that. You could just set this up on the system as a training event, and you can assign, you can say add all staff, but then knock those people out, and they all attended. So you can record that on the system. This is the training I've given for these people. So that's the manual side of it, but you can also incorporate in here actual training. So the software can deliver training. I have sort of popped on a little bit from some of the questions. If I just go back a moment to some of the questions on the checks for individuals, does it deal with European addresses? No, it doesn't, I'm afraid. There are systems out there that will do a sort of a global search, but they're incredibly expensive. This simply does UK people. And I use Iris software, which has a link to AML. What facilities does this link provide? Actually, to be honest, I don't know. I think that takes you to electronic check as well, but I really don't know the answer to that one. That's probably something you've got to look at. Is the software accessible by 6 PCs for the set price? Yes, it is. What you have is normally you would sit this on the server. So I've got this on our server here, and I've got all my team outside in the office are linked in. So you install it as a desktop on the individual computers with a link to the software on the server. So it's the price is determined by the number of clients you want to load onto the system and the number of people that you want to train, if that's what you're looking to do. You don't have to train people. If you are training people, then you'll see on this screen that I've got up here, you have the ability to say for training, when you're saying, I want everybody in there, so don't include this individual when adding all personnel. So I can say, give me all personnel, but not Mike, because he never goes on courses. So I can, all personnel would now, if I clicked in the box there, would exclude me. Do not include this person automatically when creating events for newswires or for tests. So you can set it up to say, I want this course to apply to all principals, to all other staff, or whatever, and then I can then override it, say, but not that person. So that's the sort of the training side of this. If I'm going back into that, that's the personnel side. We can also set up declarations, personnel declarations, and I'll show you that in a minute, and we can look at personnel training. So here we have a whole series of training courses, including we have a monthly newswire that is delivered through this. And this is the newswire that we issue to our clients on the money laundering MLRO support service. So this comes out every month, and I'll show you that in a moment. So that's from the MLRO side. What I can also do here is set up the firm's policies and procedures, where I can either use the pro forma and tailor it, or I can go in and just cut and paste and put it in here. And this is the firm's policies and procedures. If I now look at it from the staff's perspective, I've logged in here, and on my and on the left-hand side there's a couple of bits, and one says own training events. There are 3 outstanding items. So when I open up, click on that, what I've got here is a number of courses which have got the green tick, but I've got one which has got a test against it with a cross. So if I click on that, this is one of the tests that follows on from the online courses. The online courses have got slides with voiceover, and at the end of that they then take a test. Now, I've answered all the questions. To be perfectly honest, I haven't got a clue whether I've answered it properly or not. But although they're all answered, which you can see with a little diamond against them, and down the bottom you probably can't see it, it's probably quite small print on yours, it says answered but not marked. I can now mark the test, but nowhere on this screen is there expert guidance at the moment, because the test hasn't been marked. So I'm going to mark the test. The pass mark is 80%. Thankfully I got 100%, but since I wrote the test that's not surprising. But now as soon as it's marked and I've got a tick to say I've passed the test, I can now get into the expert guidance, and the expert guidance will explain the answers, and it will tell me where I've gone wrong. Now I can take the test again, but it'll always record my first answer, and it'll then record future answers there. We've got some more questions on how will this work in practice, and what are the cost bands. I'd like to pick that up at the end if I may. So let's just stick with what we're looking at here in terms. So that's the first one, is the test, and that's now turned to a green tick. Down the bottom we've got our newswires. So if I open up our August newswire, what the newswire does is it runs through and says, well, we have a number of questions. So typically each newswire will have 6 questions that we've been asked by our clients, where they ring up and say, well, how do I deal with this? So what's the minimum I have to do for an existing client? I've got a question on beneficial ownership. What do I need to do there? What ID checks do I need for payroll services? What do I need to do for client monies? Now typically, not so much in this month, but typically over the year, half of these questions will all relate to, as we can see on that bottom one, allegations by one client about another. Do I need to report this to SOCA or don't I? Now you have a training need to provide ongoing training to your staff on how to deal with suspicious transactions. You know, how to recognize them and what to do about them. Half of the questions that's coming out, so there's probably 12 times 6, you've got 72, so there's probably 35 examples in there each month on recognizing and dealing with suspicious transactions. You only have a requirement to do ongoing training. It doesn't say how often that needs to be, but this is effectively monthly training. You don't get more ongoing than that. And when I've read, so we've got some basic information in the newsletter about the Office of Fair Trading, because this can be used by people who are estate agents. So we've got a surveyors and estate agents version built into this. Solicitors can be using it. So whilst primarily the information examples are all based on accountants, we do have other people who use this. There's a little bit there about the changes to the money laundering regulations that kicked in on the 1st of October. And then we've got the questions and answers. Here's the questions. This is what we actually told the client. Now when I close this down, up pops a little box. It's going to appear on your screen in a minute because there's a slight delay between what I'm doing and what's popping up. It says, okay, have you finished reading this newswire? Would you like to update your training records? I say, yes, I've finished with the August newswire, so that now turned to a tick. And if I just quickly do the same with the September one, honest, I have read this. In fact, I reviewed it before it went out. So I'm going to say, yep, I've dealt with that one as well. So I've now got, all of my records have now got a green tick against them. And you'll notice now on the left-hand side, the bit in bold has gone because it's saying I'm up to date. What I do have is a declaration outstanding. And what we recommend is that you get your staff to sign an annual declaration. Now, the purpose of this is to, we would call it almost like the staff's getting to jail for free card. In the regulations, there's a bit which says if a member of staff is being prosecuted for failing to report knowledge or suspicion, if they didn't actually know or suspect, so they're now being prosecuted because they had reasonable grounds to know or suspect. So if they had reasonable grounds but they had never been trained, they've got a defence, and they would effectively be excused, and they'd say, yeah, you may stand down from the dock, and they would now be looking to the organisation who had an obligation to train them and saying, would you like to take this person's place because you failed to comply with the regulations. So the way we deal with that is we recommend that each firm, each year, you send out an annual confirmation. There's a standard, as MLRO, when you create one of these, it says, do you want to use the default wording, which is what's on the screen? And so this has now gone out to all staff, and it says, I confirm, this is so each member of staff is clicking to say, I confirm I've read and understood the firm's documented money laundering procedures and policies and procedures. I also confirm that I will fully comply with these policies and procedures. So they now say, yeah, I'm aware of them. As a result of reading these procedures and any other training stroke information received, I confirm that I am aware of the money laundering regulations, Proceeds of Crime Act and the Terrorism Act, and I confirm that I've been given training in how to recognise and deal with transactions that may relate to money laundering. And I make that declaration. Now, I'm signing in as me to say that I've done it. The declaration is made, and that's now disappeared. If I go back in as the MLRO and I start to look at the declarations, you'll see one is about to run out. When I open it and look, and this will click through to you in a moment, you'll see, well, I was the first one to do it. Now I can actually override these. I can click into one and say, would you like to deal with this? You know, and I can say, well, actually the guy's left, but he had received training. So I can, as MLRO, I can say, I can make the declaration for him, but what we're trying to do is make sure that the staff actually do it. Part of the biggest problem that the MLRO has got is nagging people. So if I go into a client like A Test Company Limited, I do have the ability, when I'm looking at this and looking at the ID for the clients, I do have the ability to go and nag the person. So I can email the staff who's in charge of this. I can email the partner, say, can you get this one up to date, please? I can go into the training and I can email all the people who haven't finished the training and say, go finish this training. Now, when I click on that button, I won't do it now because I actually closed down Outlook, so I wasn't getting stuff popping up all over the place while I'm doing the webinar. But if I were to do that, the computer starts getting a bit twitchy because somebody's trying to send that emails, and it does ask you to say, this piece of software is trying to send an email on your behalf, please confirm you're happy to do it. When you say, yeah, I'm happy to do it, it will then open up Outlook, and using the information on the system, using the emails that are logged onto the system there, that will then send all the information, and it'll send an email out saying, here's the client, this is what the status is, please sort it. And then the manager or whoever or the principal can go in and sort that information. Now there's other bits and pieces that's in the software, but within the timescale it's going to be difficult to sort of show you absolutely everything. But for example, within electronic verifications, you can do a bulk electronic verification test. So you can actually say, well, I'm not going to do one at a time, here's 100 clients, go do them all. So we've built that facility in there as well. Now that's covered with the that's covered most of it. Let's try and pick up some of the other questions that's come through on the system. So I'm looking at some of the questions that's there. What are the client numbers per cost band? If you are looking at client numbers that to get up to 30 clients, it's 140. If you're looking for 700 up to 750 clients, then it's just over £1,000 per annum, so it's 1,075, and then you pay £175 per extra 250 clients. So it just depends on the size of the business it's there. If you're then looking, you can buy the newswire separately, and for up to 10 staff, that's £120. If you wanted the training in there, then that's £240 a year. And within the training, we've got a session in there which is your introductory training, 1 hour long session for accountants. There's 3 shorter versions which are generic ones that can be used by anybody, but some of the people like to put their admin staff through just the very basic part of it rather than the full-blown hour for accountants. And there's a session in there at the moment on the Bribery Act. And as time goes on, we will bring out more training and add more bits and pieces in there. But certainly, if you've got a new member of staff, you ought to be putting them through the introductory training if they haven't already done it. If they come to you and say, yeah, I've done money laundering training, you say, that's great, there's a test in there. We won't put you through the 1 hour. Go and take the test. If they pass the test, then that's fine. You've got evidence that they've dealt with it. If they're scoring 20%, then you might want to say, yes, I know you've done it, but would you like to go in and have a go at the course again? What's the largest current installation? Depends on what we're looking at. In terms of clients, I don't know off the top of my head, but we've got people with well over 1,000, a couple of thousand clients. We do have a couple of large firms with 200 staff who are looking at this, and they don't actually want to use it for the whole of the facilities. They say, well, I've got other things, but actually we want to use it purely for training. So we've got some who are purely doing it for the recording and showing the training. They get the monthly newswire, and they've got information in there. They get their staff to take the test, and they use it for recording the training side of it. Others have just bought it for the light version because they just want to use it for the electronic verification. Is the software warranted for small accountancy practices, say 1 or 2 partner directors with, say, up to 100 clients? That's probably the largest group we've got. I mean, if you look at the demographics of accountancy practices in the UK anyway, there are more sole practitioners than anything else, and we've got more sole practitioners using this than anything else. We do have some who've literally gone in at the entry level with just 30 clients. Some firms go in at the entry level and say, well, I'm going to play with it and see how it goes. Actually, you don't need to buy a license to play with it. You can download a fully working version of it from the website, and that gives you 5 clients, I think. Now, it's got evaluation mode over any reports that comes out, but you could actually put real information in there. You could actually set up a GB account and test that if you wanted to as well, and it works. It's just a cut-down version as much as it doesn't let you have many clients. And it's on the basis that we think people are going to like it, and they go up. Those who don't like it because it won't let them cheat. What this does is it actually makes sure you are compliant. And so we have had a few people who said, oh gosh, no, this is far more than I used to have to do, which basically because they weren't doing it properly. Now that sort of brought me, that's 3 o'clock, it's brought me to the end. I've covered questions as we've gone through. If anybody's got any other questions, or if Ian, if you've got any comments you want to add to things I haven't covered, please chip in now. But otherwise, from that point of view, I'm looking at this and saying, the main session is finished, and thanks very much for that. Any other questions? Just keep coming. I'll be around, as with the others, for a few minutes.
Thank you very much for that, Mike. Just for those of you who've listened today, if you'd like to get more information on PFP AML compliance, please visit our website, which is www.pfpaml.co.uk. You'll see it on the screen there now. If you'd like to email us some questions that you might sort of think of after the webinar, please feel free to email us at info@pfpaml.co.uk or call us on 0845 307 1177, and we will be sending you all an email at some stage this afternoon just with all those numbers and details on. But thank you very much for listening, and I hope you all found that very useful.
There is a final question that's come up through Steve, which is quite a common one we get. What happens if you fail a sanctions check? Now, we actually came across, we've come across this quite a few times. There was one of our clients ran electronic verification and came up with somebody who was on the sanctions list, and it turned out to be the finance minister from Zimbabwe. He had quite a common name, and this particular client lived in Norwich, and we decided that was unlikely to be the finance minister from Zimbabwe. But what will happen within the software is that will get flagged as a cross, and the client will be put on hold until you sort it. Now you can go in and say, well, okay, I've looked at this. This is clearly not the particular individual that is on the sanctions list, and you can then unclick it and say that I'm happy with that. And if all the other information on the electronic check was fine, it was just that one thing, you say, therefore I accept the sanctions check. But if you run electronic verification and maybe somebody's only just moved and it's not picking that up, or it's saying, well, actually, no, he's not at that address anymore, which happened when I ran it on one of my colleagues recently, just out of interest, then you may have to revert to the traditional one. So you've got to fail on the electronic verification. You still goes, okay, well, I can still go and run a manual sanctions check if that wasn't the problem, and I'm now back to, can I have a copy of, can I see the passport and scan in a copy. One thing I didn't mention, you might have spotted on there, I can actually, if I can attach a scanner to the computer, I can scan it there from the computer. It just goes straight into the software. Okay, thank you very much. And
Mike.
Yep.
Yeah, sorry, Mike. One question that you didn't answer that someone asked was, will this run on a hosted desktop? Yes, it will.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you very much, and thank you very much for listening, everybody.